Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kane, he's Tom, and we talked about system and services acquisition last time. Today, we're talking about risk assessment. But before we get to that, we have some beers. What are we drinking today, Tom?
Well, I'm going to blame this squarely on you, Kane, because this is something you came up with. But we are drinking Boulevard Brewing, which, by the way, I love Boulevard Brewing. Their pale ale is one of the best. But we're drinking Boulevard Brewing Sticky Bun Cinnamon Bun Ale.
So I will own this one, Tom. So my friends and I actually have an observation of people who go to the grocery store and they buy wine based on the label, probably don't know what they're doing with wine, right? And I went to the store and I was like, Tom, it has like a little cute like it's got cute creatures. It's kind of like an anime style. It's cartoonish, and it's cinnamon bun, which I was telling a friend of mine I absolutely don't like cinnamon buns.
Yeah, I don't think either one of us are
term.
really a big fan of cinnamon buns, so I'm not sure why we're doing this at all.
It just seems like a great idea, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's a cinnamon bun ale, and it says right here it is a 9.5%, Tom.
Well, hopefully the alcohol covers the taste, maybe. We'll see. You know how I look at this, Kane, that we are just a couple weeks from Christmas when we're recording this. So this is our Christmas ale. Of course, folks won't see it until January, but it's still close enough. But this will be fun. So let's crack this, and I'm dying to smell it, to be quite honest.
Oh boy, yeah, we'll
this is a 9.5% tall can, by the way. This is a 16 ouncer. So
and just
I'm not sure. I'm not even sure I'm going to drink all of this. Ooh, in the can ooh. The color honestly surprises me. It's very dark and roasty looking.
It is very dark looking, but I can kind of see it's kind of reddish actually.
Yeah, it has a nice amber.
Look at it through the light. It's kind of red adjacent,
and it has a very caramely looking foam on the top, which is unusual.
Mm-hmm. Which I'm not going to stick my nose in.
Oh, it smells super sweet.
Oh, goodness me!
Like super sweet beers are not my favorite, so
this does smell like a cinnamon bun.
Yeah, it smells thick and sticky, honestly.
Jeez, oh, I got too close to it. This smells like misspent youth, right? Yeah. This is a gateway drug right here, I suspect.
This actually, the longer it breathes, the more like the frosting smell you can get out of it.
Yep.
That's crazy.
What I'm getting.
This is crazy. I feel like this is something out of Willy Wonka's factory, to be honest.
Okay, I got almost all of the can into my glass, Tom, so I'm learning that.
Congratulations. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm smelling cinnamon, I'm smelling bread, I can get the frosting.
Yeah, that's the big surprise to me, that frosting smell.
So weird. What is that? Pillsbury, the one that you get in the grocery store? Yeah. I think this is kind of adjacent to that.
The overarching smell to me is just sweet. It's a sweet smell.
Yeah. And I don't like sweet, so this is going to go so well.
All right, let's try it.
Well, let's definitely have a go, Tom. Oh, damn.
Man, that's sweet. I'm going to be totally honest. It tastes like a cinnamon bun.
Coats your tongue.
Definitely coats your tongue.
Oh, it's in my nose. It's got has a flavor profile of cinnamon bun, and
that surprises me. Honestly,
and
it's
sweet.
It is the cinnamon bun taste is very real. So if it wasn't for the strong alcohol underneath it, it would just taste like a liquid cinnamon bun.
And honey, that's the other.
It's very thick. I mean,
why do we do this?
Because of how sweet and sticky it is. It goes down like almost like a cough syrup for me. So.
Okay, I always try a second sip. Oh dear. Oh. Yeah, cough syrup. Oh.
Yeah, you get that kind of cough syrupy. Yeah. That's a thing for sure.
Oh, I am gonna be brushing my teeth after this episode.
I'm gonna just do a quick rinse with the water here.
Yeah. So this is actually not the worst thing that I've drank this week.
Oh,
Amazingly enough, this is not as bad as the thing that. So I had friends over last night, and we had a bottle of Advocat. And Advocat is a traditional German holiday festive. It's made out of like brandy and egg yolks.
oh,
And the
sounds
drink
terrible.
that I was told to fix was a snowball, which involves fresh squeezed lemonade, which I like, and then this Advocat in a small, and then you ice. It was supposed to taste like a orange creamsicle. And I like orange creamsicles because they don't make any sense. You've got like citrus and you've got like milk, which just shouldn't go together normally. And this, on the other hand, tasted of powdered eggs and lemon.
Hmm.
So it thankfully wasn't sweet. I will give
So,
it that. It was
so
thankfully
the
not
cinnamon
sweet.
bun is better.
This is actually, I will say, better than that because that was just like it thankfully didn't curdle, which was my real concern, but it was just unpleasant. Like I don't like powdered eggs, and it was just kind of. This, on the
Yeah,
other hand, though, wow! Like again, I own that I chose this nightmare for
that's
us,
right.
so
This is all on you.
boy, I don't even know what to do with the rest of that one. It's just going to sit there and lurk. Um, but today we're supposed to be talking about not beer. We're supposed to be talking about risk under FedRAMP. And yeah, I think actually we should talk about the risks of this beer. I think this is
The
the
risks are real
this
because
this is the
it's
real
like,
risk assessment here. Like there's a
yeah,
dude making a phone call because he's worried about this beer. I think that's probably the problem. But really, Tom, what is the under FedRAMP? What's the risk assessment family of controls all about?
sure. I mean, it shouldn't be any real surprise, right? The risk assessment family of controls is all about like how do you identify, analyze, which is a big theme in this family,
Hmm.
analyze, and then mitigate risk in your environment. So it walks you through sort of all of the steps that are prescriptive underneath FedRAMP to get to that. And of course, it mirrors NIST. There should be no surprise there.
Of course.
You know, got to like remember that FedRAMP is all about cloud security, right? So the
Hmm.
purpose of it is you're a CSP, you're providing cloud security. So there's a focus on cloud security in here as well, which shouldn't surprise anybody.
Hmm.
But it's exactly what most organizations should be doing anyway, whether you're doing FedRAMP or not. Having a framework around risk is a critical piece of any information security program, and this is no different.
Okay, cool. So it's really about things that are core to us, really about how do you do risks at a cloud service provider? And how do you do risks overall? So I suppose that the real question that comes to mind here is around evolution and around time. So Tom, how has the FedRAMP risk assessment control family really evolved in response to our changing landscape of cloud security?
Sure. I think the emphasis on analyzing, because I think there is a nod here that NIST isn't going to have an overarching knowledge of everybody's risk, right? So they're really asking you put together a program where you understand your own risk. So that analyzation piece of it, that's a big one. And then, of course, as seems to be throughout the FedRAMP, especially Rev 5 edition, there's a focus in here on your supply chain. So there's a nod to supply chain in a number of control families now. It's part of the DNA of any information security person anymore, so it shouldn't be a surprise again. But
Right.
you're going to analyze your supply chain risk as well with this family of controls. So that's probably the biggest evolution that's occurred. But otherwise, it's a pretty standard information security risk framework designation.
Well, let me just be pedantic here just for a second. I don't think it's not a risk framework. It's a
No,
series of controls that
okay,
we apply
that's right.
to risks, but it's not an RMF. Just have to say that one there. But the other thing that comes to mind in terms of evolutionary changes, I think that it's still evolving, right? Like this is not a static framework. As you say, we saw Rev 5 come out because supply chain is now at least getting a nod. If I were to be using my crystal ball, I'd say I'd expect even more of that in future revisions based on adversarial engagement, which is what I think has driven a lot of these conversations in the past that led us to Rev 5, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that as NIST evolves, FedRAMP evolves, and we know that NIST is pretty consistently being looked at in terms of what needs to be added. I think they've done a better job lately in terms of stacking those things and releasing them as a single iteration upgrade.
Mhm.
But we're going to see that with FedRAMP, and we're certainly going to see, I think, an evolution around supply chain. I think right now there's an ask on anybody going through the ATO process to assess your supply chain. I think it's going to get considerably more prescriptive over time.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, let's talk about challenges that organizations run into. Like, you and I have done this before. What are the most significant, let's say, challenges that organizations are facing when implementing the risk assessment controls, and how have you typically seen that be addressed?
Yeah, well, let's be honest. The conversation of risk is as much about the words that you use as anything, and getting people aligned top to bottom on what it means when you talk about risk is always a challenge. So
Mhm.
this is talking about getting everybody in the big offices on the corner, right, aligned with everybody who's down in the trenches about what risk means, and making sure that everybody understands this isn't just information security. Although certainly with FedRAMP, that's a big focus, but
Right.
risk is bigger than that, right? So you want to align information security risk and business risk together, and you really want to take a holistic approach when you talk about risk. Otherwise, you're talking about risk in pockets, which means you can't really
Mhm.
prioritize it, right? That's
All
always a
right.
challenge. I mean, I've seen it in companies big and small to get people aligned behind what it means to talk about risk and what is really defined as a risk rather than a threat or something like that. It's always a difficult sort of mental exercise to get everybody aligned. Once you get there, this usually flows pretty well. People start to get the hang of it pretty quickly.
Mhm.
You do want to have more than one person in the room doing these sort of assessments, right? Especially when you start to define what is risk. To do that exercise in a vacuum, or even to have 5 people all doing it separately but not discussing, that's a bad way to do it. You need the flow of
Definitely.
information. You need the ideas to bounce off everybody else, so people really
Mhm.
align to what risk looks like.
So let me just do a what if for people in the audience here. So because there's always this question of what is a risk and what defines a risk. So let's try and quick live exercise here, Tom. So let's say we have a system, and let's say the system is internet facing, and let's say it has a vulnerability, and there's evidence of an exploit being available in the wild for that system.
That's a
Is it,
vulnerability to me.
is it a
That's
risk?
that's not a
Thank you.
risk.
Okay, I
Now,
had to ask because some people I know who will remain nameless would say, "Well, that's a risk," and I would posit, like you, that is not itself a risk, right? There's no impact statement associated with it, and I didn't define what type of system it was. It could be some dev burner system that has no material impact on the business, right? And it's still just a vulnerability. That's
I,
not a risk.
I will say that this family of controls blurs the lines a little bit. So there
Hmm.
is a whole section under RA about vulnerability management. So
Right.
they're nodding that vulnerability management is a feeder into information security risk.
Hmm.
In my opinion, they confuse it a little too much. But the fact of the matter is, it is rolled up underneath here, so you've got to account for it in your program.
Right. Okay, and we will get to those controls in a moment. But before we do, I want to just ask about the risk assessment controls, how they compare with other cybersecurity frameworks that we have, such as other NIST frameworks or ISO standards.
Sure. So what's interesting is, you know, if you looked at, say, NIST and ISO together and then compared it to FedRAMP, you're going to see a ton of overlap because they're all really the controls. Well, NIST is NIST and
Mhm.
FedRAMP is NIST based. But you see ISO borrows significantly from NIST as well. And whether that's by design or by, just best practice accident,
Mhm.
you're going to see a lot of overlap in those controls. And similarly, you're going to see a lot of overlap in almost any framework that you come across that's talking about risk assessment. Now,
Right. So I
what you're going
imagine that a lot of organizations then could take the work that they've done on FedRAMP
to
and
reuse it
reapply it to an ISO standard as part of their ongoing compliance operations.
completely. I mean, it should be completely reusable. The fact of the matter is, FedRAMP will be more prescriptive
Mhm.
and leave less opportunity for interpretation. So it should be very transferable. There is, of course, the differences of tailoring to specific asks of frameworks, but that's really more of like a scoping exercise underneath the major requirement. It's not a big difference in terms of the meat and potatoes of the framework. So you're going to see a lot of similarity.
Fantastic. And if you're watching this and you're enjoying this conversation on YouTube, do ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find literally any beer that's, well, better than this or subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice to make this part of your monthly routine. So, Tom, I want to ask about some specific controls.
Sure.
I wanted to start right at the top, like we always do. Let's talk about RA1. How do organizations typically approach the development and the documentation of risk assessment policies and procedures to make sure that they're actually aligned with the complex nature of their operations?
Yeah. So the policy piece is easy. And usually that's the piece that can be written in a vacuum because it's really just aligning your requirements. So your information security guy is going to read FedRAMP. He's going to build out his policy. He might throw it around the leadership ring and say, hey, there are other requirements from a bigger business risk that we want to include in this one policy. But that's the easy piece of this. The process is the part that is completely customized to an individual organization. So you really have to pull the covers back. You're going to have some organizations that maybe have a chief risk officer that already has lockdown on how he views risk. Yeah, there might be some horse trading to get information security placed correctly and make sure that everything's being looked at holistically, but he has a process generally already in place, right? So what you're doing is you're pulling his process into the FedRAMP documentation, so it's documented, and you make sure that you follow it, on a quarterly, annually, whatever basis it is. There's other organizations that do not have this built out, and that can be a real challenge.
Yeah,
you're asking folks that have been often tactical security folks to suddenly step back and say strategically, how do I look at risk, right? And what is the process I want to flow through? Who needs to be there? What's the frequency? What are the metrics we're going to use for impact and likelihood? These are all pieces of that process that you have to define for yourself, document, and make sure you follow. That can be a challenge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember actually. I was working with a multinational firm, and they had a risk policy that they would do a risk assessment every 5 years, and they'd update their procedures associated with their risks as well every 5 years. And this was in the past 3 years. Like, this was kind of in the middle of the pandemic, I think, is when I had them as a client. Anyway, where that was incredibly problematic for them is they wrote the policy, let's say 10 years ago, and then they had an entire staff change in between. And then it came to the 5-year mark, and they did the thing that was written down, and they made some notes, and then they changed the entire team again. And so when I came to them at the next period to talk to them about their cybersecurity maturity, they were adrift because they first of all realized that they shouldn't just do a risk assessment every 5 years, because that doesn't make sense in the modern world. But they also didn't know, how do we update this? How do we move forward from this weird place that we're at? And I guess that makes me think of for RA1, there's also triggers in there, right? So what triggers would really lead to the review and update of those current policies and procedures under RA1? And how often would you say organizations need to do that?
Well, there's the default trigger, which is 1 year. So after every year, you should be reviewing policy and procedure. I think actually for moderate, FedRAMP gives you some wiggle room. I think it can be up to 3 years. But I'm telling you, as an information security person, especially when it comes to risk, but really all your policy, try to review it annually. It's just going to put you in a better position. So that's the default trigger. Now there's this other sort of category of triggers that you would say are event driven. And certainly when it comes to risk, those can seem fairly diffuse to your everyday operations, but you really need to consider them. I think about you talked about an organization that had a 5-year cycle. Well, I think every organization should have assessed risk based upon macroeconomic pressures that are occurring. Really, I would say since the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine began. We had very predictable economic pressures that came with that war, and it does impact business. Certainly impacts supply chain around the world. So you should at least put that in your risk assessment, that you've looked at it and you either deem that it's low impact or medium or high or whatever it is for you. But if you're completely ignoring it, you're doing a disservice to your organization. You should be looking at triggers that are occurring not only in information security space, but also really in the macro level in the world, and saying, is this something that I need to assess in my risk program?
But now that, I immediately thought of ERM and ESG, enterprise risk management and environmental, what is the S and SG? Societal and G is governance. That's not in FedRAMP, though, is it, Tom?
No, there's no ESG in FedRAMP.
Okay, that's what I thought. And ERM is also not in FedRAMP. So macroeconomic, even though I totally agree with you that yes, you should be looking at these things, that's not actually a trigger under FedRAMP, is it?
Well, it's not for FedRAMP, but
moderate.
again, I want to go back and say that you should not have two information security risk programs in your organization.
Oh, totally. 100%. I'm going to like, what does the FedRAMP program specifically require? Because otherwise somebody in the comments will say, actually. And so we're making a best practice recommendation here, not necessarily here's what FedRAMP says.
Yeah, but FedRAMP does say, sort of in a very broad way, assess your risk and analyze your risk and put in place your mitigations against risk. Now, because FedRAMP is based upon a boundary, what they're really saying is you should do it around this boundary, right? And you're right. The best practice should be don't disclude your greater business, or certainly don't have two programs that aren't intertwined and feeding each other on priority. So, yep,
got it.
You're right.
Got it.
Right. You know, you're like the grammar police of this podcast, and I appreciate that, Kane. I do. You keep me on track, but no, you're exactly right. FedRAMP is not that detailed.
Okay, fantastic. And now I'm apparently the grammar police as well as a pedant, so I'm just having a banger kind of day, and we still eventually have to talk about this. But I wanted to ask you about a couple other controls. I want to talk about RA3. So in the context of RA3, how are organizations really conducting a comprehensive risk assessment, particularly, and this is, again, FedRAMP, where they talk about identifying system threats and vulnerabilities?
Yeah, this is a place where, again, they confuse, in my opinion, the word risk, threat, and vulnerability. Yep. But we have to take it holistically, right? So, you know, there's a baseline here that we have to assume is in place, and that's that you understand the inventory of your boundary, because that's what all this is going to be based upon. This is a feeder into the POAM, so every month you're going to report upon it. But you really have to do a complete assessment of everything inside your boundary, and you can't take the easy button approach to it. You know, they're going to want to make sure that you've done a comprehensive analysis of what's in the boundary. You've looked at things holistically, so you know, firmware levels, and you've done your vulnerability scans. You've thought about, you know, hey, if we're a Windows environment, are we more apt? Is a likelihood higher that we're going to be attacked than if we're, say, a Linux environment? Don't know if it is or not in your stance, but that's the level of detail they're going to want to understand. They're going to make sure that you integrate those results from, you know, all the vulnerability scanning, the threat analysis, all of that integrated into the larger risk management decision making that's happening in the organization. And then basically assess the results of all that analysis and what does it mean in terms of how you are going to proceed. Are you making changes? Are you putting in new controls? All of that needs to be documented. So it's RA3 is a
holistic approach.
Yeah, it's the meat and potatoes of this. You know, writing policy and procedure, and you know, some of these other those are relatively easy controls to meet. This one is the meat, and this is where you're really going to have to think about your particular boundary in particular. What does it mean to assess risk in it, and are we doing comprehensive vulnerability scanning?
Cool. All right, so last question on a specific control here. Let's talk about strategies. The strategies that you use in remediation of identified vulnerabilities, which is required under RA5, and how organizations would prioritize those vulnerabilities based on the risk assessment.
Yeah, so again, RA5 is all about vulnerability monitoring and scanning. So, you know, at a base level, do you have the scanning in place? Is it frequent enough? Is it in depth enough? Is it running with privilege, which is a big piece of this? So you've got to make sure that you're not running, you know, sort of the blind assessor type vulnerability scanning. This is, hey, we're actually inside and assessing vulnerabilities as if we got inside privilege. So that's what this is all about. And then again, it all has to flow. So you have to make sure that what you find in that scanning flows right into the POAM. The POAM has to have very specific attributes associated with it, right? So when was it found? How quickly did you mitigate it? What did you do to mitigate it? All of this has to flow up. Certainly where it gets the attention of the larger risk register is when you have something that you can't easily mitigate, or you can't mitigate it in the way that you would like. So maybe you have to put some compensating controls around it for a period of time and report on it differently. That's when it hits your risk register in the bigger risk program in general.
Okay, but the key emphasis point there you have is it's an internal scan with privilege, not an external scan, and then really prioritizing. Do they have evidence of usage in the wild or a proof of concept for a vulnerability as a criteria?
What they have
is that just like, hey, there's a vulnerability and it's priority?
What they have is you need. Oh yeah, if there's a vulnerability, it's a priority. That part is period. But
so it's not. So it's not that nuanced then.
But what is nuanced is there is the requirement that the tool set that you use is getting frequent, capable, and I think the term is readily updated with emerging threats and vulnerabilities. So what they're nodding to is the fact that you're probably going to have a tool like we do that's scanning continuously. That tool doesn't do you any good if it's scanning continuously but not being updated continuously as well. So that's actually that has not been in the industry as easy as I just made it sound.
No, it's definitely not. And there's been far too many false positives out of far too many tools that land on too many people's desks that sucks the air out of the room when you're doing vuln management and patching. Yeesh, yuck. Speaking of sucking the air out of the room, I have been wrinkling my nose here. I think some viewers might have seen it. I can smell this now. Like I normally, when you and I do a show, I can smell the beer at the top of the show, and then I'll put it down on the table I have in front of me, and I can't smell it. It's very aromatic. It smells like a cinnamon. Yeah, it's diffuse. It's a very, it smells like a cinnamon, like if you baked them in your kitchen. And yeah.
You know how what I think it smells like? It smells like a cinnamon roll that has been dipped in like a liqueur. It has that.
The only way to have that, actually.
Yeah,
depending on the liqueur, of course. Just don't do Advocat, I'd say.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, I haven't even emptied all of my can into this glass, and this is very not typical for me to have that much beer still.
Here's how much I can still fit in, right? Look at that. Yep. All right. Well, as usual, I'm going to regret this one. I usually try the beer at the end of the show to see how it's. Oh, dang, that smell. The nose is very prominent, very pronounced cinnamon. Cinnamon, sticky, cloyingly sweet, something that probably like your dentist approves of this. I'm pretty sure it feels that sweet, actually. And as usual, I'm going to take another sip before we review this. Here goes. Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah. Tom, I found a 1. We found a 1, buddy. We have found the floor. There, I cannot imagine, even including sour beer, that there is a worse beer out there than this. This is possibly the worst thing that I've drank this year.
Wow. So I think it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse over time. Yeah. Initially, I was like the egg thing with the brandy in, but at least it wasn't this nasty. This is horrible. This is just disgusting.
Well, I think anybody who follows me closely enough would know that it's not typical for me to not have this most of the way gone as we talk. I mean, to be honest, Kane, just to talk with you, I need plenty of alcohol generally. So, what I don't like in beer, this embodies pretty closely. I don't like sweet and sticky tasting beers. And that's all of these things. I do like ales. So this is an ale, so that should have been good. But one thing about ales is it gives you the opportunity to do creative and sometimes really poor decision making. So that's an indicator of this. I cannot get away from the idea that this is sort of like the cough syrup mom would throw down your throat when you're a kid. And so I honestly think of it as almost like a punishment to drink this. And that's not like me, because I'm really open minded when it comes to beer, and this has a really oily hang too, by the way. So I want to go back and say one thing. I'm a big fan of Boulevard Brewing in general in a bunch of their beers. This is not one of them. I'm going to meet you at the bottom. I'm going to give this a 1. So I'm kind of done drinking it. I'm not gonna savor all 9.5% alcohol in the rest of this beer. I'm going to punt on it.
Yeah, we have found the worst beer of the year, I suspect, at this point, Tom.
Yeah,
Yikes,
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, wow. Again, it just do not buy based on how the cute can looks. Apparently, that is a poor choice when selecting a beer. But with that, that's all for today. If you think that you know a beer that that I'd like, that Tom would like, if you know anything that is actually better than cinnamon bun ale, or if you have a FedRAMP question, drop it in the comments below. And remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to hear live interviews with information security professionals. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.